Hello and welcome. Tonight, I invite you into the ancient and mysterious atmosphere of a medieval inn. In those centuries, people did not venture out for pleasure, but for mandatory reasons such as trade or religion. The distances between cities were incredibly long, and the roads were incomparably more dangerous than they are today. Your horse was everything to you, because being stranded on the road meant being completely defenseless. Inns, on the other hand, were the only protected and official shelters along these perilous routes. The structure of the inn was built with durability and functionality in mind rather than comfort. There was no such thing as glass in the windows. Instead, well-soaked parchment papers were used to block the wind. The air inside was always a mixture of wood smoke and a stale scent. The straw spread on the floor was actually a quite clever solution. It absorbed all the dirt and moisture. When it was time for cleaning, the innkeeper would simply sweep away the old straw, and that was it. You would find yourself sitting side by side with interesting faces who had set out for very different purposes. A pilgrim, whom you would immediately recognize by the seashell badge on his cloak, would pour out the story of his holy journey before you. A merchant sitting in the corner with restless eyes was preoccupied with how to get his goods to a safe harbor. An old soldier, clattering his beer mug against the table, could dive into a new adventure story at any moment. The medieval inn was perhaps the only place where all social classes of the kingdom were forced to coexist. In that era, modern expectations such as privacy or a single room were completely meaningless. If you managed to secure a bed, you were likely sharing it with two strangers you had never met before. Benefiting from each other's body heat was an entirely natural way to survive the cold nights. If you were looking for private space, you were likely in the wrong century and on the wrong floor of this smoky inn. Yet, this crowdedness was actually your greatest physical guarantee against the brutality outside. Before moving on, I have a small request. If you enjoy this kind of content, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Your support is truly very valuable to me. Also, I would be happy if you could write in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is. I am genuinely curious about who is watching this video and at what time. Now, turn off your lights and get into your most comfortable position. If you are ready, let us begin this calm journey together. As the sun slowly retreats toward the horizon, the most challenging part of the day for you is actually just beginning. Being a traveler in the Middle Ages is nothing like those cheerful horse-riding scenes romantic movies show us. You have likely been on the road since the first light of dawn. The saddle beneath you now feels no different than stone. Your legs are numb, and the damp cold seeping through your cloak has settled deep into your bones. The road you are traveling on might not have been repaired even once since the fall of the Roman Empire. This rugged path, made of mud, wheel ruts, and horse manure, is considered one of the kingdom's main roads, yet it truly resembles nothing more than a wide goat track. As the sky grows darker, the feeling that settles within you is not one of sweet peace, but a slight and peculiar anxiety. Because in this era, night is not merely darkness. Night is uncertainty. The howling of a wolf rising from the depths of the forest or the sudden rustling of the bushes by the roadside does not stir your imagination in a pleasant way at all. It drags your imagination to places that are far from pleasant. Your eyes search for a tiny point of light flickering in the darkness, a trace of civilization. At that exact moment, right where the road turns, you see that object creaking and swaying in the wind. This is a sign of salvation. We are in front of the inn, but wait a minute. This is not a brightly lit place with a large sign saying inn as you might imagine. Above the door, there is likely a bundle of dried bushes or a wreath of ivy hanging. This simple sign says, "There are drinks here, come inside." The medieval person thinks practically. Literacy rates were so low that writing on a sign occurred to no one. Even if they had written it, 9 out of 10 people passing by would have looked at those letters like meaningless lines. Therefore, communication was entirely visual. If you look carefully at the wooden plaque swinging at the end of the pole, you can make out a painting drawn with faded colors. Perhaps a face framed by leaves, the Green Man. Or perhaps the figure of a white stag. These pictures were not mere decorations, they were the names of the inns. People wouldn't say, "Let's meet at the inn on the corner" when giving directions. They would say, "Let's meet at the Green Man" or "Wait in front of the White Stag." Visuals were the language of this world, its everything, its alphabet. If the sign creaks too much in the wind, it is not because of the innkeeper's neglect, but likely because they couldn't find the time to grease the hinges. Or perhaps that sound is a natural warning system in itself, keeping thieves away. Who knows? Let's take a look at the exterior of the inn. Usually, a simple structure greets you, 2 stories high, with a wooden frame and wattle and daub filling. The walls lean slightly to one side as if carrying the weight of the years. The roof is most likely thatched with straw. Thatch roofs are known for keeping the winter cold inside, but they also serve as a perfect shelter for insects, mice, and occasionally birds. If you hear strange scurrying sounds above you at night, do not worry, it is just the other residents of the roof starting their night shifts. The windows are quite small. Glass is an unimaginable luxury for an inn during this period. Oiled parchment papers are stretched over the openings, or simple wooden shutters are attached. These shutters are mostly kept tightly closed so that the heat inside does not escape. This leads to stuffiness, of course, but it is better than freezing. As you approach the door, the first scent that hits your nose is a mixture of damp wood and slightly burnt meat. For a medieval traveler, this scent is the most beautiful perfume in the world, because it means hot food and a fire. While looking for a place to hitch your horse, you try not to get stuck in the mud of the courtyard. The courtyard is the heart of the inn, but also its filthiest corner. Horses, chickens, and humans share the same ground. Hierarchy is determined right here. If you have money, your horse goes to the stable and you go to a room. If you have no money, both of you spend the night in the courtyard. But you are lucky tonight. You have a few silver coins in your pocket, and the door cracks open for you. The moment the yellow, flickering light leaking from inside hits your face, that uncanny forest road you left behind suddenly vanishes. Now, you are a guest of the Green Man. This is not a luxury accommodation. It is certainly not a place where the sheets smell of lavender. But it is a small fortress of its own, detached from the brutality outside, with its own rules. As you step inside, you notice why the doorstep is left slightly high. This is not purely an architectural choice, it is to prevent the straw and reeds spread on the floor from spilling out. In a way, it is a method of keeping the warmth and the filth contained together inside. When you push the door open and enter, that dense, smoky air that slightly stings the throat fills your lungs. As your eyes try to adjust to the darkness, the hum inside ceases for a moment, and several curious glances turn toward you. This is an unchanging rule of the Middle Ages. Every newcomer is scrutinized. Who are you? Are you wealthy? Are you dangerous? Or are you just an ordinary person who has lost their way? This silent interrogation lasts only a few seconds. Then, everyone returns to their beer and conversation. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight on your shoulders lighten slightly as you slip inside. Once you pass through the main door, the first things on your mind are hot soup and a soft bed. However, the brutal priorities of the Middle Ages immediately warn you. No matter how exhausted you are, the living creature beneath you is far more precious than you are. If your horse is injured or falls ill, you are left unarmed and on foot in the middle of a desolate road. Therefore, before entering that smoky hall, you must turn your course toward the massive, pungent structure at the edge of the courtyard. That is the stable, and believe me, the guests there might receive better service than you tonight. When you step into the stable, the person who greets you is the groom. The groom is one of the quietest yet most powerful figures of the inn. He does not care who you are or where you come from. He only looks at your horse's bone structure, its shoes, and its sweat-soaked hide. If the animal is well-bred and strong, he shows you some respect. But if its ribs are showing, even the innkeeper's gaze toward you changes instantly. In the Middle Ages, a horse could be compared to today's luxury sports car. The quality of your horse reveals both your social status and the fullness of your wallet. When the groom takes the animal, he doesn't just tie it in a corner and leave it. He grooms it, checks its legs one by one, and most importantly, inspects its shoes. In an era where roads are this broken, a thrown shoe means a delay that could last weeks. Now, let's get to the bitter truth: pricing. In a medieval inn, accommodation for humans is sometimes surprisingly cheap. At times, it is even free simply because you paid for a meal. But for your horse, the situation is the exact opposite. The horse's shelter, the oats it eats, and the groom's tip can turn into a much larger expense than your own dinner. A knight's warhorse back then could be worth the entire annual income of a small village. In light of this fact, the animal being fed better than you is not just a courtesy, it is an economic necessity. While you dip stale bread into watery soup, your horse enjoys the highest quality straw and fresh oats. If you are stingy and only give your horse straw, the groom begins to look at you as if to say, "This man doesn't have a penny in his pocket." The air inside the stable feels strangely more serene compared to the main hall. Here, there is no human vanity or concern for social visibility. There is only the rhythm of chewed straw, the gentle snorting of horses, and that sharp scent of ammonia hanging in the air. In some medieval inns, the stable door was designed to be visible from the innkeeper's room. Theft was so common that stealing someone's horse was equated to stealing their life. The penalty for horse theft was much heavier than for many other crimes and was usually irreversible. Your horse stands here alongside the other traveling animals. Perhaps in the adjacent stall is a merchant's pack horse, and on the other side, a pilgrim's slow-paced donkey, getting along well with the groom. As you step inside, you notice why the doorstep is left slightly high. This is not purely an architectural choice, it is to prevent the straw and reeds spread on the floor from spilling out. In a way, it is a method of keeping the warmth and the filth contained together inside. When you push the door open and enter, that dense, smoky air that slightly stings the throat fills your lungs. As your eyes try to adjust to the darkness, the hum inside ceases for a moment, and several curious glances turn toward you. This is an unchanging rule of the Middle Ages. Every newcomer is scrutinized. Who are you? Are you wealthy? Are you dangerous? Or are you just an ordinary person who has lost their way? This silent interrogation lasts only a few seconds. Then, everyone returns to their beer and conversation. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight on your shoulders lighten slightly as you slip inside. Once you pass through the main door, the first things on your mind are hot soup and a soft bed. However, the brutal priorities of the Middle Ages immediately warn you. No matter how exhausted you are, the living creature beneath you is far more precious than you are. If your horse is injured or falls ill, you are left unarmed and on foot in the middle of a desolate road. Therefore, before entering that smoky hall, you must turn your course toward the massive, pungent structure at the edge of the courtyard. That is the stable, and believe me, the guests there might receive better service than you tonight. When you step into the stable, the person who greets you is the groom. The groom is one of the quietest yet most powerful figures of the inn. He does not care who you are or where you come from. He only looks at your horse's bone structure, its shoes, and its sweat-soaked hide. If the animal is well-bred and strong, he shows you some respect. But if its ribs are showing, even the innkeeper's gaze toward you changes instantly. In the Middle Ages, a horse could be compared to today's luxury sports car. The quality of your horse reveals both your social status and the fullness of your wallet. When the groom takes the animal, he doesn't just tie it in a corner and leave it. He grooms it, checks its legs one by one, and most importantly, inspects its shoes. In an era where roads are this broken, a thrown shoe means a delay that could last weeks. Now, let's get to the bitter truth: pricing. In a medieval inn, accommodation for humans is sometimes surprisingly cheap. At times, it is even free simply because you paid for a meal. But for your horse, the situation is the exact opposite. The horse's shelter, the oats it eats, and the groom's tip can turn into a much larger expense than your own dinner. A knight's warhorse back then could be worth the entire annual income of a small village. In light of this fact, the animal being fed better than you is not just a courtesy, it is an economic necessity. While you dip stale bread into watery soup, your horse enjoys the highest quality straw and fresh oats. If you are stingy and only give your horse straw, the groom begins to look at you as if to say, "This man doesn't have a penny in his pocket." The air inside the stable feels strangely more serene compared to the main hall. Here, there is no human vanity or concern for social visibility. There is only the rhythm of chewed straw, the gentle snorting of horses, and that sharp scent of ammonia hanging in the air. In some medieval inns, the stable door was designed to be visible from the innkeeper's room. Theft was so common that stealing someone's horse was equated to stealing their life. The penalty for horse theft was much heavier than for many other crimes and was usually irreversible. Your horse stands here alongside the other traveling animals. Perhaps in the adjacent stall is a merchant's pack horse, and on the other side, a pilgrim's slow-paced donkey. Getting along well with the groom. Gemini Sunu Dedi. As your eyes begin to adjust to the smoky dimness, you notice something rustling beneath your feet. Do not expect carpets or smooth floorboards on the ground of a medieval inn. The floor is usually covered with rushes, reeds, or straw. While this may seem crude and peasant-like at first glance, it is the most functional solution of the era. This layer absorbs the mud from the floor, traps the heat inside, and conceals spilled food scraps. The innkeeper might have tossed a fresh layer of straw on top in honor of your arrival, but thinking too much about the biological diversity beneath it would surely ruin your sleep. Some innkeepers scatter dried lavender, thyme, or chamomile among the straw to mask the odor. As you step on them, these crushed herbs release a faint herbal scent into the air, momentarily distancing you from the harsh realities of the Middle Ages. The lighting, however, is a completely different story. The main light source of the hall is the flickering flames of the hearth. On the tables, candles made of animal fat burn. These candles do not smell pleasant like beeswax. Since they are made from tallow, they emit a heavy scent of burnt suet and leave behind a great deal of soot. If you are lucky and the innkeeper is somewhat wealthier, reed dips or rushlights soaked in animal fat are used. These lights burn with a constant sizzle, flickering as if they might go out at any second. This dimness makes the faces inside appear more mysterious, and perhaps more intimidating, than they truly are. It requires you to squint just to tell if someone is looking at your way. This semi-darkness ensures that everyone remains both curious and guarded. The furniture in the hall is also designed to suit this practical world. Long wooden tables stretch across the center. These tables are not fixed to the floor. As the night progresses and the hall begins to empty, the tables are pushed aside, and the area transforms into a collective dormitory. The stool you are sitting on is likely roughly crafted and wobbles slightly. Yet, these tables are the most egalitarian corners of that era. A merchant, a soldier, and a traveler like yourself rub elbows on the same piece of wood. The surfaces of the tables have grown glossy over the years. This shine is not from cleanliness, but rather a natural patina created by spilled oils and the friction of thousands of hands. Although the walls may be whitewashed with lime, they have taken on a gray tone due to the smoke. In some inns, you might see faded tapestries. These are less about decoration and more about insulation, serving to block the cold seeping through the stone walls. Do not be surprised if you see one of the tapestries rippling gently. Most likely, a draft leaking through a crack in the stones has found its way inside. This wind swirls the smoke around the room in curls, giving the environment an even more surreal appearance. Sounds are the final piece of this atmosphere. The crackling of wood, the dull thud of beer mugs hitting the table, low-voiced murmurs, and the wind outside straining against the door. All these sounds combine with the dense scents and dim light to weave a cocoon that draws you in. It is safe here, but this safety depends on your adherence to the rules. Although the medieval inn may seem hospitable, it harbors a quiet and rigid hierarchy. Everyone respects each other's boundaries. Now, imagine yourself sitting at that table. The shadow of the flickering candle in front of you looms large on the wall. The rustling of the straw beneath your feet slowly draws the day's fatigue from your legs. That thick wood smoke filling your nostrils no longer bothers you. On the contrary, you It feels like a shield against the darkness outside. As your eyes slowly grow heavy, you see the innkeeper making his way toward you. He wipes the table with a rag in his hand and looks at you. Once you have taken your place at the table, it is time to meet the true rulers of this smoky little universe. The innkeeper standing before you is much more than a modern hotel receptionist. In that era, running an inn was not just a livelihood, it was a serious social responsibility and an art of diplomacy. He might not be the most elegantly dressed man in town, but he is certainly the man who knows the most. The heavy iron keys hanging from the leather belt at his waist are symbols of his absolute authority in this fortress. As the innkeeper approaches, the sharp gaze you feel on your back is not a casual greeting. It is like a scanner that, in those brief seconds, evaluates your social status, how dangerous you might be, and the weight of your wallet. Being an innkeeper in the Middle Ages also meant being an unofficial representative of the local authority. In many kingdoms, it was a legal requirement for innkeepers to record the identities and movements of their guests. If you are a suspicious-looking stranger, the artificial politeness shown to you might actually be part of a silent interrogation. When he asks, "Where are you coming from?" it is not small talk. He is trying to figure out if you are a spy, a fugitive, or just a weary merchant. If your answer is not satisfying, you might find yourself sitting on the most uncomfortable stool in the darkest corner. However, if that slight mocking expression on his face turns into a genuine smile upon seeing the glimmer of your silver coins, know that you have been elevated to the category of guest of honor for the night. The innkeeper's wife, on the other hand, is the invisible but most powerful engine of this ecosystem. She manages the kitchen, the pantry, and, most importantly, the supply of alcohol. Although women's social roles appeared limited in the Middle Ages, inns were an exception to this rule. The innkeeper's wife is often the person responsible for brewing the beer. In those days, beer was not just a recreational beverage as it is today. Due to the pollution of the water, it was the most fundamental fluid for survival. The green branch hung at the door of the inn meant that fresh beer was ready, and she was likely the one who hung it there. This woman's skill directly determined the reputation of the inn. If her beer was bad, no matter how eye-catching the sign was, that inn would quickly drift toward bankruptcy. Therefore, the innkeeper's wife worked with the precision of a chemist over the giant cauldrons in the kitchen. In the Middle Ages, innkeepers were legally and directly responsible for the stolen property of their guests. In systems like English common law, this was explicitly regulated. In other words, if a theft occurred in your room, the innkeeper had to pay for this loss out of his own pocket. This situation explains why he acts so carefully and suspiciously. While ensuring your safety, he is actually protecting his own wallet. This is why the innkeeper wanders silently through the corridors throughout the night, checking the door bolts and recording everyone who enters and exits in his mind. His meticulousness is a comfortable sleep for you and a legal guarantee for himself. The division of labor between the innkeeper and his wife is as clear as the departments of a modern company. The innkeeper deals with the outside world and the security forces. His wife manages the internal world, production, cleaning, and the staff. When I say staff, these usually consist of a few kitchen helpers and the groom sleeping in the stable. When the innkeeper's wife bursts out of the kitchen with a huge wooden spoon in her hand to scold a drunken customer, you immediately understand who the real general of this place is. Her authority in the kitchen. Dot is indisputable. She keeps track of every piece of meat that goes into the pot. To this woman, waste is the greatest sin, and every crumb that arrives at your table has a purpose. The lives of this couple flow within an uninterrupted traffic of people. Every day, dozens of different stories, different dialects, and different troubles walk through their door. Over time, this develops in them a natural cynicism and a detached perspective on life. Your complaint that the road was very difficult is just one of the hundreds of grievances they hear every day. To them, you are a source of income to be hosted for one night and sent on your way at dawn. Yet, beneath this professional coldness lies a genuine hospitality that protects you from the darkness outside. When the innkeeper wipes the table, turns to you, and says, "The food will be ready soon, don't rush," you feel that hidden peace in his voice. The place of innkeepers in society is quite interesting. While they may not be among the wealthiest in town, they are the most influential. This is because every piece of news, every rumor, and every innovation reaching the town passes through their doors first. In a sense, they are like the news centers of the Middle Ages. The innkeeper knows what the local lord is thinking, as well as the status of the harvest in the neighboring village. If you need information on a subject, buying the innkeeper's wife a quality drink yields results much faster than weeks of research in a library. Of course, this information has a price. You either provide a piece of news in return or leave a few extra silver coins on the table. Now, as you sit at your table, enjoy the heavy-scented but satisfying atmosphere the innkeeper has woven for you. Watch the sparks scatter as the innkeeper throws a giant log into the great hearth. His wife is watching from the kitchen door, keeping track of your meal as it cooks. They are your most important allies tonight. As long as you follow their rules, your head will be safe under this smoky roof. You have passed through the social filter. The innkeeper has marked you as someone harmless and capable of paying. You are now a part of this inn. Soon, the innkeeper's assistant will approach you with a steaming bowl in hand. The noise inside will suddenly turn into background music for you. As you hear those harsh but rhythmic orders coming from the kitchen, you will feel like a small gear in this massive organization. Have you started to wonder who the other people at your table are? Because in the Middle Ages, eating alone is a luxury, and soon you will see the table fill up with history's most colorful characters. As you leave the innkeeper and head toward the long table you've eyed, you face the most fundamental social reality of the Middle Ages. Privacy is a concept that has not yet been discovered in this century. In the modern world, you have the luxury of entering a restaurant and asking for a table for two. But here, the tables belong to society, not to you. The moment you place your elbow on the wood, you have actually entered a vast pool of stories. The man to your right could be a candidate for sainthood. The one to your left is likely someone considering robbing you in your sleep. Sitting at this table is like a medieval roulette, and who you end up next to directly determines the quality of your sleep that night. The most prominent group at the table are the pilgrims. They are not hard to recognize. The seashells pinned to their cloaks, lead seals, or the long staffs in their hands immediately give away who they are. In the Middle Ages, a pilgrimage is a mixture of today's world tour and a ritual of spiritual purification. These people have walked thousands of kilometers and have much to tell. They were under special protection on royal roads and were exempt from many local taxes. This made them the untouchable travelers of the era. However, these holy travelers have one handicap: their never-ending stories. While they describe a relic in Jerusalem or a miracle in Rome, all you want to do is focus on your soup in the midst of your exhaustion. To them, this inn is not just a place to stay, but a stage with a plentiful audience. Right across from you, you see the merchants in their more elegant yet equally worn clothes. Merchants are the quietest but most alert residents of the inn. While sipping their beer mugs, their eyes are constantly on the door. Every stranger is to them either a potential thief or a new tax official. The fabrics, spices, or metal goods they carry with them are their entire fortune. When you sit next to them, you notice they aren't very interested in you. They whisper with the innkeeper, trying to learn about road conditions, where bandits were last sighted, or which count has opened his customs gate. Merchants are the living newspapers of the Middle Ages. If you want to hear about a rebellion on the other side of the kingdom, you must wait for a single sentence to fall from the mouths of these sullen men. Of course, to hear that sentence, you will likely need to buy them a glass. In a darker corner of the table sits a figure with calloused hands, his cloak pulled tightly over him. He is likely a soldier. He is either an archer discharged from the army or a mercenary ready to draw his sword for anyone who pays. These people are the most unsettling yet reassuring elements of the inn. If there is a soldier at the table, no one easily seeks a fight. But if the soldier himself decides to start a fight, slipping quietly under the table would be the wisest move. The presence of these men reminds you once again why the inn is kept so dim and smoky. They avoid eye contact. They have seen too much on the battlefields. Their heavy silence hangs like a deep note amidst the noise inside. Another interesting figure you might encounter at the table is the type who sells indulgence documents or holy relics on behalf of the church. These men are usually cheerful, silver-tongued, and somewhat suspicious. He tries to convince those at the table that the chicken bones or old pieces of cloth in his bag will open the gates of heaven. The medieval inn is a perfect market for such sellers. People are tired, caught in a beer-induced haze, and anxious about the future. These conditions are almost ideal for selling a fake relic. You can get an idea about their honesty from the way the innkeeper looks at them. He usually looks as if to say, "Do your job, but don't try to rob my customer too much." At this cosmopolitan table, social class differences melt away for a moment. A university student, a farmer leaving his village for the first time, and a wealthy merchant share the same coarse bread. This is one of the rare moments of equality offered by the Middle Ages. However, it also brings certain hygienic risks. When the pilgrim next to you breaks his bread with the same hands that just touched a holy relic, all you have to do is ignore it. In this world without privacy, the voices, smells, and breaths of others are an inseparable part of dinner. If someone starts praying out loud or if another has already passed out and started snoring, you must take it as natural. This is not a library, it is the common shelter of people trying to survive. As people talk, the hum inside becomes even more intricate. Different dialects, and occasionally different languages, mix together. The voice of a merchant discussing the quality of French wine mingles with the story of a local saint. Collides with the voice of the peasant recounting the miracle of a local saint. You are merely an observer within this chaos. The way the candlelight hits their faces turns each of them into a character from a painting. Guessing who hides a dagger in their pocket and who conceals a pouch of gold in their sash is the most enjoyable way to pass the night. Of course, all the while, your own pouch must stay held firmly between your knees. The interaction you establish with those at the table is entirely up to you. If you bow your head and mind your meal, no one will disturb you. But if you nod as if believing someone's dragon story, you suddenly become the most beloved person at the table. In the Middle Ages, information and stories are a currency as valuable as silver. If you have brought fresh news from distant lands, you might even cover the cost of your meal that night. People are starved for news from the outside world, and if you are the bearer of that news, you become the most important person in the inn for a while. Now, visualize this colorful yet exhausting crowd. Your shoulders are touching. That dense smell of people and smoke hanging in the air burns your throat. The sound of the man across from you eagerly gnawing on a bone mingles with the laughter from the next table. When fatigue combines with this noise, it turns into a strange pre-sleep grogginess. Your eyes are on that large bowl that will soon be placed before you. For although stories may feed the soul, that rumbling from the stomach is strong enough to drown out all social analysis. When you lean your elbows on the hard surface of the table and find a spot, you feel your hunger even more deeply. Dinner in a medieval inn does not offer an extensive menu like today's. You don't think, "What should I eat?" You wonder, "What was made today?" That familiar, heavy, and somewhat mysterious scent coming from the kitchen has already answered this question. The innkeeper's wife begins to stir that black cauldron by the hearth with a massive, steaming ladle in her hand. The mixture inside this cauldron is the most fundamental, honest, and sometimes most terrifying dish of the Middle Ages, pottage. To put it simply, pottage is an unending stew. In an inn's kitchen, this dish continues to simmer for days, sometimes even weeks, over a fire that never goes out. The pot is never completely emptied. As it diminishes, new ingredients are added. Today's vegetables combine with yesterday's grains and perhaps the aroma of a piece of meat left over from last week. This may not sound hygienic. However, in the practical world of the Middle Ages, a constantly boiling cauldron is the safest way to kill germs and use ingredients without waste. That thick liquid inside the pot is a storehouse of energy. You can't quite tell exactly what's in it, but you are certain it will keep you full until morning. It likely contains plenty of barley, oats, a few leeks, onions, and if it's a lucky day, a small piece of salted pork or bacon. The bowl placed before you is made of wood, and likely dozens, perhaps hundreds of lips have touched those edges before you. However, since people in that era were unaware of germ theory, this bothers no one. The spoon provided with the meal is also usually wooden. In the Middle Ages, you were expected to carry your own knife when going to an inn. The innkeeper might provide a spoon, but a sharp knife was always considered a personal item. In fact, this knife was not just for eating, it was your closest friend against potential dangers on the road. The fork, meanwhile, was almost entirely unknown in European inns during this period. Using a fork was seen by some religious circles at the time as an insult to the fingers God gave us and was considered a sign of excessive vanity. Thus, to catch the solid pieces within that thick stew, using your fingers. That is not frowned upon by anyone here. The most faithful companion to pottage is bread. However, this bread is not the fluffy white bread you buy from the bakery today. The bread offered to you is likely made from rye and barley flour. It is a dark bread, hard as a rock on the outside, and dense and slightly moist on the inside. In the Middle Ages, the color of bread was a document shouting your social status. While white bread graced only the tables of nobles and very wealthy merchants, travelers in the inn had to settle for these hard and dark-colored loaves. However, this bread has one more duty, which is one of the most ingenious inventions of this period, the trencher. A trencher is actually a large slice of bread that has been left to harden for a few days. The innkeeper places this hard slice before you as a plate. They pour your watery stew over this bread. The bread softens by absorbing the juice and fat of the meal but does not fall apart. When your meal is finished, you are left with a soft, flavorful piece of bread soaked in delicious stew juices. If you are very hungry, you eat this plate too. If you are full and want to perform an act of charity, you give this wet slice of bread to the dogs at the door or to a poorer person seeking refuge in the inn. Thanks to this system, the trouble of washing dishes in inns is kept to a minimum and no calories are wasted. This is medieval-style recycling and waste management. As for the meat, it is not always possible to see fresh meat on an inn's menu. In the Middle Ages, hunting rights usually belonged to local lords, and for a peasant or an ordinary traveler to eat venison was considered forest theft, the punishment for which was quite severe. The meat you eat is generally salted, dried, or smoked. Salt, in this era, is a preservative more precious than gold. So much salt is used to prevent the meat from spoiling that you feel your palate go dry after eating the meal. This works in the innkeeper's favor. Because the saltier the food you eat, the more beer you will order. The reason for that slight, mocking smile in the innkeeper's kitchen is the knowledge that your thirst will fill his coffers. Regarding vegetables, medieval cuisine is quite limited. Potatoes, tomatoes, or corn, which are indispensable to our tables today, have not yet reached Europe because America has not yet been discovered. So, do not expect fried potatoes on your plate. Instead, there are plenty of legumes. Peas and beans are the main elements providing protein. Peas porridge hot, peas, cabbage, and onion is the rhyme that best summarizes the food culture of this period. If you are lucky, you might catch the taste of wild garlic or green onions in the stew. Spices like black pepper and cinnamon are considered luxuries and usually do not visit the bowl of an ordinary traveler. The true flavor of the meal comes from the aged soot of that ancient cauldron over the hearth and the fact that the ingredients have been cooking together for a long time. Eating speed naturally slows down in this environment. The stew is very hot, and you must wait for the bread to soften. During this time, the sounds of chewing, spoons hitting wooden bowls, and the crackling of the hearth combine to create a hypnotic rhythm. No one wishes each other a good appetite, everyone is buried in their bowl to survive. When the meal is over, wiping the grease from your fingers onto your pants or the straw on the floor is not rudeness here, but an extremely ordinary action. As your stomach fills, the day's fatigue weighs heavier on your shoulders. While that salty, heavy meal warms your body, it also slowly clouds your mind. To clear the salty and smoky taste in your throat, your hand involuntarily reaches for the large mug beside you. But wait a second. In the Middle Ages, one of the most dangerous things you can do in an inn is to ask for fresh water from the well outside. Water in this period is not a clear source of health, but a risky element of unknown contents. Even though people do not yet know the concepts of microbes and bacteria, they know that water. Learn through bitter experience why those who drink it often writhed with stomach aches. In this world, where town waste systems and rivers were intertwined, living water was truly alive. It harbored countless parasites. This is why, instead of handing you a glass of water, the innkeeper begins to fill that large, heavy mug in front of you. The cloudy, dark beverage before you bears no resemblance to today's beers. In the Middle Ages, what you drank was called ale. Since hops had not yet become widespread in every region, this drink did not carry the bitter and refreshing taste of modern beer. It was sweeter, denser, and almost had the consistency of a soup. They didn't call it liquid bread for nothing. The grain content was so high that it not only quenched thirst but also provided significant calories. While preparing this drink, the innkeeper's wife added barley, oats, and occasionally wheat. Since harmful organisms in the water were destroyed during the boiling process, this drink was the healthiest thing in the inn. Without realizing it, medieval people were actually sterilizing the water by producing ale. In that era, beer was such a fundamental necessity that the daily ration of monks working in monasteries could sometimes reach 5 liters. Even children consumed a drink called small ale, which had a very low alcohol content but high nutritional value. Drinking water, on the other hand, was a symbol of either extreme poverty or a heavy religious penance. If you asked for water at the inn, the innkeeper would either look at you with pity or see you as someone who had lost their mind. For a civilized person knew to reward their body with this nourishing liquid. When you pick up the mug, you feel its weight. Unless you are a wealthy merchant, the mug is likely made of oak and reinforced with metal rings. In more modest places, leather vessels called jacks, lined with pitch, were used. Drinking beer from a leather vessel might feel strange at first. The slight taste of resin touching your lips and the flexibility of the leather add a different character to the drink. But when you take that first sip, you feel the exact moment that warm, thick liquid sliding down your throat reaches your stomach. It is not cold. In the Middle Ages, there was no habit of cooling drinks with ice. The temperature of the beer, surrendered to the natural coolness of the cellar, was just that much. The taste of the beer was quite variable by today's standards. Every inn and every village had its own recipe. Some innkeepers added a herbal mixture called grut to enrich the aroma. This mixture, consisting of herbs like yarrow, juniper berries, or wild rosemary, did not just add flavor, it also gifted a slight lightheadedness and relaxation. After a few sips, you now better understand why the people at the table seem more sympathetic and why that boring story the pilgrim was telling suddenly turned into an epic legend. The alcohol content was generally low, but the sugar and density within it slowly drifted you into a sweet lethargy. As the innkeeper wandered between tables with a large pitcher in his hand, his eyes were always on the emptying vessels. He didn't ask if he should refill, he silently added a bit more of that foamy liquid to every empty container he saw. This was the most profitable business of the inn. Selling drinks brought in much more income than renting rooms. In fact, many inns emerged spontaneously from a house where only beer was originally produced, which eventually began to accept travelers. You watch your fellow guests clink their mugs together. Instead of saying cheers, they mutter a short prayer for health or abundance. That muffled, dull thud of wood hitting wood is the lowest note of the inn's background music that lasts all through the night. Do not get hung up on the cloudiness of the drink. A few floating grains or sediment are proof that the beer is fresh and unadulterated. Since modern filtering techniques do not exist, you notice that the liquid becomes even denser as you approach the bottom of the mug. That sediment is actually the most nutritious part. People in the inn trust this drink so much that even when they wake up in the morning, they start the day with a bowl of beer and a stale slice of bread for breakfast. Beer is the fuel of the Middle Ages. Everyone, from the peasant working in the field to the monk in the church, moves with this fuel. As you sip your mug, the tone of the arguments at the next table rises a bit higher. While one merchant complains about the weight of taxes on the roads, another praises the abundance of this year's harvest. Tongues are loosened by alcohol, but the innkeeper's stern gaze is always upon them. Because beer provides courage, but a fight breaking out in the inn harms the innkeeper's permission, that is, his income. If someone overindulges and collapses onto the table, the innkeeper gently pulls him to a corner. This culture of liquid consumption is actually a silent social control mechanism. Everyone drinks from the same mug, from the same cauldron. This creates a temporary but real bond of brotherhood among them. When you reach the bottom of the mug, the thick liquid inside begins to spread through your body. A sweet warmth rises from your toes to the tips of your ears. The sound of the freezing wind outside no longer scares you. When the smoke, scent, and hum of the inn combine with this drink, everything falls into place exactly as it should be. The harsh reality of the Middle Ages softens behind the cloudy and sweet veil of beer. You are now one step closer to the deep and inviting arms of sleep. But first, you need to see not only how these people eat and drink, but also how they enjoy themselves. Because the little games played at the tables after dinner are the only things that warm the darkest hours of the night. When the sediment at the bottom of the mug becomes fully apparent and the heat of the hearth begins to circulate in your veins, the noise inside changes form. The sounds of eating are replaced by the sound of bone pieces and wooden chips hitting the table hard. In the Middle Ages, entertainment is not about being buried in screens. It consists entirely of physical and social interaction. When the empty bowls are pushed aside, the bare wooden surface that emerges turns into a playing field for the rest of the night. These games are not just for passing the time. Playing in a medieval inn is both a source of great passion and a serious risk. The thing people show the most interest in are dice, referred to as the devil's bones. These dice, carved from animal bone or horn, are not perfectly balanced like today's. Each die has its own unique weight and tendency. This turns the game into an art of reading the temperament of the dice rather than just a matter of pure luck. The most common game is called hazard. It is considered the ancestor of today's craps, and its rules are quite complex. A player determines a number and tries to reach that number by throwing the dice. Meanwhile, everyone around the table bets on what the result will be. What is put on the line is sometimes a few copper coins, sometimes the next meal, and sometimes a cloak, the price of that long fatigue on the road. Gambling was not well received by the church and the crown in the Middle Ages. King Edward of England issued a law in 1363, stating that instead of the public spending time on dice games and similar entertainments, commanded them to practice archery instead. This was because a good archer was far more useful to the kingdom's army than a good gambler. However, it is hard to say that the innkeeper cared much for such prohibitions. The smoke from the hearth and the dimness inside provided a perfect shroud for these forbidden pastimes. The innkeeper only grins slightly when he sees the coins circulating on the table, because he knows every losing player will drink one more mug for consolation. If dice games seem too noisy, the lines carved into the table might catch your eye. In many medieval inns, squares for the game of nine men's Morris are carved directly into the wood. This game, requiring intellect and strategy, is loved by all segments of society. Two players, with 9 pieces each, try to eliminate one another's pieces. It is not as loud as dice, but the sharp and mocking glances the players cast at each other strain the atmosphere at least as much as gambling. A merchant losing to a peasant could turn into the most talked about gossip of the evening. Entertainment is not limited only to games. The true fuel of the Middle Ages is stories. Finding professional musicians or bards in inns is not as common as one might think. Most of the time, music begins spontaneously with a simple flute someone pulls from their pocket or rhythmic hand clapping. If you are lucky, you might see a minstrel, a traveling musician, in the corner. But these men do not wear silk clothes like in the movies. You listen to someone covered in dust, with a weary voice, telling of love or heroism in a distant land. These stories are like the TV shows and movies of that era. No one gets bored of hearing the same story multiple times. What matters is not the end of the story, but the magic the narrator weaves within that smoky room. Humor is the harshest yet most natural part of this entertainment culture. Medieval people know very well how to mock their own challenging lives. The jokes told at the table are generally crude, direct, and a bit cynical. Jokes built around an ambitious priest, a naive peasant, or an arrogant knight fly through the air. Within each lies a hidden rebellion against the rigid hierarchy of society. While laughing at these jests, you forget your momentary exhaustion and the endless road awaiting you tomorrow. As people tease one another, social statuses melt away for a while among the embers of the hearth. There is also the tradition of riddles, which is the most pleasant way to keep the mind sharp. Medieval riddles are based on nature, daily objects, or religious themes. The time spent seeking an answer to a complicated question asked by someone clears the heavy air of the inn. Simple questions that can be debated for minutes over a sip of beer, such as "it has no mouth but speaks, no feet but walks," occupy the mind. The small sense of victory experienced when the answer is found is the sweetest feeling to accompany your sleep that night. As the night progresses, the tempo of the game slows down and conversations hush. The lights dim even further. The heavy scent of the candles becomes more pronounced. People slowly withdraw into themselves. Game pieces return to their bags, and dice are hidden in palms. Entertainment is replaced by the final fatigue of the day and a longing for the bed. This small and temporary community in the inn has warmed up to one another a bit through games and stories. Spending time at the same dice table with a stranger makes you companions, if only for a single night. Realistically speaking, most of these entertainments are anesthetics for the difficult journey that will begin in the morning. Lost money, exaggerated stories, and idle talk all remain within that smoky hall. But for that moment, sitting across from the hearth and listening to a ridiculous tale told by someone feels like the most important business in the world. The chaos in your mind is replaced by It yields to the clatter of game pieces and the faint hum of a song drifting from afar. When your eyelids grow too heavy to track the pieces any longer, you see the innkeeper approaching, swinging his small lamp. This is the moment when the entertainment ends and the truly challenging part, finding a place to sleep, begins. As you rise from the table, you feel your knees stiffen and the imprint of the stool remains on your body. Yet, the peaceful exhaustion within you acts as a shield protecting you against the darkness outside. Stories have been told, games have been played, now it is time to shut down the mind and rest the body. As you follow the innkeeper's flickering lamp toward the narrow, creaking stairs, you must leave any dreams of a private room on the very first step. In medieval inns, privacy was an unattainable concept reserved only for royalty or the high clergy. With a few silver coins in your pocket, you are likely heading to a shared dormitory called a communal room, or a large chamber directly above the main hall. Every step of the staircase moans in a different tone, as if wishing to whisper the entire history of the inn to you. Once upstairs, you step into a vast room divided only by thick curtains or without any doors at all. The air here is even heavier and denser than below. It is not smoke this time, it is the breath and sweat of dozens of sleeping people that has filled every corner. As your eyes try to distinguish the beds in the dim light, the innkeeper points to a wide bed in the corner. But there is a problem, 2 people are already sleeping in it. This is the social reality of the Middle Ages that astonishes modern people the most, bed sharing. In that era, sleeping in the same bed with a total stranger was considered as ordinary as sitting next to a passenger on a bus today. Sleeping alone was not only a luxury accessible to the very wealthy but was also viewed as strange and antisocial behavior. People preferred to sleep together to keep warm, save space, and occasionally protect each other from thieves. When the innkeeper points to the narrow gap at the edge of the bed and says "sleep well," you realize it is time to meet your travel companions for the night. You listen to the rhythm of the snores rising from the quilt. One of the people lying next to you is likely the old merchant whose story you listened to at the table earlier. The other might be the pilgrim who has quietly settled in. In the Middle Ages, going to bed had its own unwritten rules and ethics. Courtesy books prepared in that period included warnings such as not kicking your bed partner, not pulling the sheets too much, and not facing the other person while sleeping. You were expected not to take off your clothes completely, or at least to sleep in a long undershirt. This was both to protect yourself from the cold and to show a minimum level of courtesy to the stranger beside you. Sleeping completely naked was only accepted between married couples or very close family members. As you slip into the bed, you hear the rustle coming from beneath the straw-filled mattress. The merchant next to you stirs slightly in his sleep, opening up just a shoulder width of space for you. When the weight of the quilt covers you, you feel that famous social warmth of the Middle Ages. Yes, looking at it through today's understanding of hygiene, this picture might seem like a nightmare. But on that dark night, where wolves howl and the wind lashes the stone walls, feeling the heat of another human is strangely comforting. For a medieval person, loneliness mostly meant danger. At least you know that in a crowded bed, before a thief could grab your throat, you would be able to wake the person next to you. At this point, one of the most interesting facts about medieval sleep patterns comes into play: biphasic sleep. Modern humans lie down and aim for uninterrupted sleep until morning. But medieval people did not sleep that way. For them, the first sleep would begin shortly after sunset and last until around midnight. Around midnight, people would naturally wake up and stay awake for about an hour. During this time, they would whisper with their bedmates, pray, keep a journal, or get up to throw another log on the hearth. Then, the second sleep would begin and continue until morning. So, you should not be surprised if the merchant next to you wakes up at midnight and starts telling you about the wool prices in his hometown. This is the most ordinary social activity of that era. This mandatory intimacy with your bedmates requires a silent diplomacy, if viewed through a cynical lens. If the man next to you is snoring too much, coughing lightly is a more polite warning than nudging him. If the quilt has slipped toward your side, slowly pulling it back is an art in itself. Trying to sleep in this cramped space without touching each other is actually a game of balance. Of course, you haven't taken into account the other inhabitants of the bed yet, those tiny, biting creatures hidden between the fabrics. They are the true hosts of this bed, and your fresh blood is a nightly feast for them. But don't worry, everyone in the inn shares the same fate. In the rest of the room, the situation is no different. Sighs rising from other beds, someone muttering while dreaming, and the occasional heavy footsteps of the innkeeper passing through the corridor break the silence of the room. In the darkness, there is only a faint glow leaking from the hearth below and the moonlight filtering through the windows. In this atmosphere, your individual identity dissolves. You turn into a nightly piece of that great mass of humanity. Who you are or how much money you have loses its significance under this common quilt. Everyone is equally tired, and everyone is equally in need of the arms of sleep. Now, try to adjust your body to the shape of the straw in this narrow, warm space. Let the steady breathing of the stranger next to you accompany you like a metronome. In this most crowded hour of the medieval inn, you may actually feel safer than ever. Because you are surrounded by people just like you, who only want to make it to the morning safe and sound. But before you fall fully asleep, you need to get to know your bed and the guests within it a bit more. Because in the Middle Ages, a bed is not just a piece of furniture, it is an ecosystem in its own right. In that era, the pinnacle of bedding technology was the straw mattresses called pallets. You might have heard stories about the rich sleeping on down beds, but the probability of finding down in a traveler's inn is lower than the probability of the innkeeper offering you free wine. The mattress you lie on consists of dry straw stuffed into a giant bag made of coarse linen or hemp. Straw is the most practical filling material of that period. It is cheap, found everywhere, and in theory, easily replaceable. One must emphasize the words in theory. When the innkeeper tells you the straw is fresh, he likely means it's from the third or. That doesn't mean you are the fourth guest, he means it's from the third or fourth month. Over time, straw gets crushed, turns into dust, and instead of taking the shape of your body, it turns into hard stalks that poke into your skin. The hardness of this rustling bed is not its only problem. It traps moisture and harbors all kinds of microorganisms. Right at this point, the endless war of the medieval person begins: insects. That slight itch you feel when you get into bed is not just from fatigue. Bedbugs, fleas, and lice are the most loyal and numerous customers of the inns. Being bitten in the Middle Ages is not a health catastrophe, but a slightly annoying yet ordinary detail of daily life. When you wake up in the morning, those small red dots on your arms are the most natural seal of having spent a night in a medieval inn. However, medieval people are not completely defenseless against this invasion. Innkeepers and housewives resorted to the tools offered by nature to keep these unwanted visitors away. Certain herbs would be scattered inside the mattress or near the hard leather roll used as a pillow. The most common is wormwood. Known for its sharp and bitter scent, this herb is a natural repellent used for thousands of years against fleas. In addition, lavender, mint, and dried chamomile were added among the straw to both mask the heavy odor and provide a bit of hygiene. If you are lucky, that slight herbal scent hitting your nose is a sign that the straw beneath you has been handled at least once this season. To put it with cynical realism, the quality of your sleep that night is directly proportional to the abundance of herbs in the innkeeper's garden. The quilt or blanket on top of you is a completely different story. In this period, quilts are not light and synthetically filled like today's. The cover over you is likely made of dense wool that is coarse, heavy, and takes months to wash. Wool is the most precious commodity of medieval Europe and keeps you warm even on the coldest nights. But lying under this heavy cover can sometimes feel like a rock has settled on your chest. The quilt is so heavy that turning from side to side in your sleep requires serious physical effort. This weight is actually an advantage. It prevents the freezing wind, leaking from the end stone walls and straining the wooden shutters, from getting underneath. When you take refuge under that dense wool, you feel as if an impenetrable fortress has been built between you and the world. In the Middle Ages, textile products were so valuable that bedding and quilts were among the inheritance items separately specified in wills. 10 clean quilts in an innkeeper's possession were the most concrete indicator of his wealth. Of course, the concept of clean is relative here. Quilts were likely laid out in the sun once or twice a year and beaten with a stick to clear them of dust. Deep cleaning with water and soap was not preferred as it would cause the fabric to felt and fail to dry. This meant the quilt preserved the scent of smoke, beer, and humans accumulated over the years. When you pull that quilt over you, you are actually pulling over yourself the memories of hundreds of travelers who stayed in that inn before you. The matter of the pillow next to the bed makes you question the understanding of comfort once again. For many inn customers, a pillow is either a small bag filled with straw or their very own travel bag. In fact, in some places, a curved wooden block or a leather roll placed under the head serves as a pillow. This hardness is actually connected to the hair care habits of that period as well. Hair, not as frequent as today. Since hair was not washed as frequently as it is today, using soft and absorbent pillows would cause oils and dirt to transfer to the pillow, leading it to deteriorate quickly. While sleeping on a hard support might seem like a disaster for your neck at first, it ensures you stay away from the smoke and dust until morning. Toward midnight, a balance is established within the bed between the warmth of the hearth and the coolness of the straw. As your bedmates begin to snore, you find your own place in this rustling world. When you stretch your hand outside the quilt, you feel the freezing air of the room and immediately retreat back into the safety of that heavy wool. Sleeping in a medieval inn is, in fact, sleeping in tandem with nature, with straw, insects, wool, and with smoke. All of these materials come directly from the earth or from animals, pulling you away from the sterile artificiality of the modern world and taking you back to humanity's oldest, most primitive form of rest. Comparing tonight's bed to the comfort of a 5-star hotel would be unfair. This place is more of a survival capsule. Those tiny pricks within the straw remind you that you are still alive. The warmth of the stranger beside you prevents you from freezing. The weight of the quilt does not allow the darkness outside to pull you in. As your eyes gradually close, the last image appearing in your mind is a straw moving inside the mattress. Did it move on its own, or is a tiny inhabitant inside changing places? You are too tired to think about it. You surrender yourself to that dense scent of wool and the heavy, smoky arms of sleep. However, uninterrupted sleep is not always possible in the Middle Ages. When your body is filled with so much beer and pottage, ignoring nature's call at midnight becomes impossible. That ceramic vessel you must find by touch in the dark room, or that uncanny path leading to the cold garden outside, awaits you. Answering the call of nature at midnight in medieval inns was nothing like turning on a light and walking across warm tiles to a bathroom. If you are lucky and the innkeeper is somewhat meticulous, there is a chamber pot, a ceramic or metal vessel, right under your bed. These pots were also called Jordans in that period. Trying to find this vessel in the pitch black of midnight is a test of coordination in itself. You must slide silently off that creaking straw mattress without waking the 2 strangers beside you. If you accidentally step on the merchant's hand, the reaction you receive certainly won't be a blessing. Once you find the pot, your greatest enemy is the cold. When the freezing surface of the ceramic touches your skin, you worry that the rest of your sleep might vanish. In the Middle Ages, urine was not seen as mere waste. Many innkeepers would collect this accumulated liquid to sell to tanners or cloth dyers. The ammonia within urine was a valuable substance used for cleaning fabrics and fixing dyes. In other words, the legacy you leave behind that night could be one of the innkeeper's sources of additional income. Furthermore, in certain periods, doctors would diagnose illnesses solely by looking at the color and scent of the liquid in these vessels. But not every inn is so well equipped. In some places, there is only a single chamber pot, and it sits in the farthest corner of the room. In that case, you must glide like a shadow through the crowd of sleeping people. The straw beneath your feet shouts, "I am here," with every step you take. If the chamber pot is too full or non-existent, the second option comes into play, heading out to the place called the latrine or privy outside the inn. This is more than a simple necessity, it is a test of courage. When you throw your cloak over your shoulders and step outside, pushing through the creaking door, the night air hits your face like a sharp slap. The toilets in the backyard of the inn usually consist of a simple wooden hut over a deep pit. In some more advanced inns, these structures were built over a stream. But in an ordinary roadside inn, you should keep your expectations low. When you get there, the real problem awaiting you is the matter of cleaning. In the Middle Ages, there is no such thing as toilet paper. People used the softest materials nature provided to clean themselves, a handful of dry grass, straw, old scraps of wool, or, if the inn was a bit more luxurious, damp moss. Moss was considered the highest quality cleaning material of that era. If you aren't carrying your own supplies, you are condemned to the straw on the ground. This clearly explains why everyone walks a bit uneasily when they set out in the morning. Odor management is also quite creative under these conditions. Innkeepers frequently used lime to suppress the smell of the pits. Strongly scented plants were also planted nearby. Still, in the summer months, an inn's backyard did not exactly smell like a rose garden. As you finish your business in the dark and try to rush back inside, you are actually bearing witness to one of the greatest urbanization problems of the Middle Ages. The inability to manage waste will be among the most important causes of the Great Plague epidemics in the centuries to come. But right now, you are thinking only of returning to your warm bed. When you step back inside, you slip into your room accompanied by the creaking of the stairs. That heavy smell inside no longer seems so bad to your nose. Because after the freezing cold outside, this damp and smoky warmth looks like heaven to you. As you slide back between the two strangers, you realize that your body heat is still preserved where you left it. Settling in under the rustling straw, even the dream of the modern world's snow-white bathrooms does not cross your mind. For now, the greatest luxury is being able to see the morning without freezing. At this hour of the night, there are others awake beside you. The crackle of a log from the hall below or a restless neighing rising from the stable breaks the silence. Perhaps you see the innkeeper wandering the corridors with a lantern in his hand. This night watch is not just for the comfort of the guests. That heavy bunch of keys in his hand is the guardian against the inn's greatest fear, theft. As you close your eyes again, you are aware of the silent order prevailing in the dark corners of the inn and how safe your belongings are. While the unique texture of the bed pulls you back in, you drift into the second phase of sleep with the lightness of having attended to your natural needs. The cold pit outside and the ceramic vessel under the bed are now merely memories. Now, what you must focus on is whether you will find your cloak and your gold pouch in place when you wake up. For sleeping in a medieval inn is not just physical rest, it is the art of protecting your property. Do not expect to see a modern lock or keyhole when you look at the door. In medieval inns, room doors are usually secured from the inside with a heavy oak bolt. This bolt is effective against a sudden attack from the outside, but it is of no use against a thief already inside. For right now, you are sharing the same room with people you have never seen before and will likely never see again. This situation explains why security in the Middle Ages was an individual responsibility. People developed the art of staying alert even while sleeping to protect their belongings. If you have a very valuable item, it is a common practice to put it in a chest by the bed and sleep while sitting on top of it. Where you hide your pouch is the greatest sign revealing your experience on these roads. A novice traveler might make the mistake of leaving their money in a cloak pocket. But an experienced traveler never keeps their money in a single place. Some of the gold is inside their boot, some in a hidden compartment of their belt, and the main portion is in a leather pouch hung around their neck and hidden under their shirt. You never take this pouch off your neck throughout the night. In fact, some travelers use only their bags as a pillow. That hard leather bag provides a more peaceful sleep than the world's softest down pillow, because for a thief to take it, they would first have to lift your head, an action that would wake you even from the deepest sleep. In some kingdoms, like England, there were strict laws regulating the innkeeper's responsibility. According to these laws, if a guest's property was stolen in the inn, the innkeeper had to compensate for the loss in full. This rule explains why innkeepers wandered the corridors like guards at night and why they questioned everyone who entered. For the innkeeper, your security is the security of his own wallet. Some meticulous innkeepers would ask guests to entrust their valuables to them for the night. These items would be placed in a heavy iron chest in the bedroom and remain under the innkeeper's personal supervision until morning. Realistically speaking, trusting the innkeeper is a much more logical investment than trusting the stranger pilgrim lying next to you. However, these rules did not always apply everywhere. Some inns were known as actual dens of thieves. There were even inns that served as hubs for the trade of stolen goods. If the innkeeper noticed you had too much gold and had ill intentions, he could ensure that your door bolt was accidentally left open at night. Therefore, flaunting your wealth or counting your gold at the table during dinner is the greatest stupidity one can commit. The first rule of survival in the Middle Ages is to appear poorer than you are. An old, patched cloak and a worn-out bag are the most effective security systems, sending the message that there is nothing here worth stealing. That shabby appearance protects you much better than the most expensive armor. Security is not limited to money alone. Your horse, your weapons, and even your cloak are targets. Tucking your cloak under your pillow or wrapping it tightly around you is not just to keep warm, but to prevent it from walking out of the inn on someone else's shoulders at midnight. Placing shoes at the foot of the bed inside the quilt, rather than under the bed, is also a common habit. A thief trying to escape barefoot is much less dangerous than a stolen horse. This physical contact with your belongings is the foundation of that restless security you feel throughout the night. In the dark room, you listen to every creak coming from outside. Is it the heavy footsteps of the innkeeper walking in the corridor, or someone in the room standing up silently? Distinguishing these sounds from one another is a medieval traveler's survival instinct. If someone in the room stirs, coughing lightly to signal that you are awake is the most effective deterrent. The message "I am not sleeping, I am aware of everything" can instantly discourage an opportunistic thief. Most thefts in inns stem from presented opportunities rather than planned robberies. As long as you do not provide that opportunity, your belongings will remain with you. But what if the thief comes from the outside? Since the windows of inns are usually very small and positioned high up, it is extremely difficult to slip in from the outside. Moreover, after dark, the main door is secured with a massive wooden beam. This beam is so heavy that lifting it alone is impossible. Entering or leaving without the innkeeper's knowledge at midnight is nearly impossible. This effectively turns the inn into a temporary fortress. You are inside and you are safe, but you are also bound by the innkeeper's rules. This closed-circuit security system is the greatest luxury offered to you on those uncanny roads. Now, bring your hand to the pouch on your chest one last time and feel the hardness of the silver coins under your fingers. They are all there, with you. The snoring of the merchant next to you indicates that he, too, is certain of his belongings and has dived into the depths of sleep. Surrender yourself to this rhythmic sound as well. Let the thief scenarios in your mind give way to the peaceful yet alert silence of the inn. The bolt is on the door, the innkeeper is in the corridor, and the pouch is under your shirt. Now, you can truly sleep. The first and most dominant sound you hear when you close your eyes is human snoring. Those rhythmic sounds made by the merchant beside you or the pilgrim in the opposite bed are actually the greatest evidence of security. For a medieval person, deep snoring is the clearest indicator that the person is asleep and harmless. It is only when everyone in the room suddenly becomes silent that you should truly worry. Silence could mean someone is awake and perhaps acting with ill intent. Those massive snores are essentially the room's way of saying to one another, "Don't worry, I am still sleeping." Secondly, you will hear the almost incessant sound of muffled coughs. This is the most natural consequence of the Middle Ages' smoky atmosphere. People spent most of their lives breathing in wood smoke in enclosed spaces with no chimneys or inadequate ones. This led to chronic lung problems in a large portion of society. Every cough echoing in the silence of the night is a silent reminder of how primitive the heating technology of that era was. People were so accustomed to these sounds that someone coughing throughout the night was not considered unusual enough to interrupt anyone's sleep. The inn's own voice joins this chorus as well. Medieval buildings were constructed from heavy oak beams and wooden frames. As the air cools, these massive structures contract and begin to speak. Do not let the sudden creaking of the stairs or the explosive sounds of the ceiling beams frighten you. This is merely the inn's way of adapting to the cooling air. These rhythmic stretches of the wood do not give you a lullaby, but rather the feeling that you are lying in the belly of a living giant. And what about those scuttling sounds above? You remember that the inn's roof is made of straw and reeds. Just as these roofs protect you from the cold, they also serve as a perfect refuge for local wildlife. Mice, birds, and occasionally weasels take shelter in the warmth of the reeds. In the silence of the night, you can hear the movements of these creatures on the roof very clearly. A light scratching or the scurry of tiny feet is an inseparable part of medieval sleep. These animals are not interested in you, they are merely escaping the owls outside or the freezing wind. Getting used to their presence is the first rule of living in tandem with nature. Medieval people lived in a biphasic sleep pattern, naturally waking up in the middle of the night and remaining awake for about an hour. During this time, the sounds you hear become quite interesting. You might hear someone praying in a low voice in the dark, pouring out the day's fatigue to the person next to them, or discussing tomorrow's route in whispers. These silent murmurs of midnight are the most sincere social sharing moments of that era. No one shouts, but that cloud of low voices filling the room functions as a natural white noise that helps everyone transition into the second stage of sleep. One must not forget the small rustlings within the bed. When the night shift of bedbugs and fleas begins, the light friction sounds of people scratching in their sleep echo in the room. Someone scratching their arm harshly or the frustrated sound they make while adjusting the mattress symbolizes the victory of these tiny creatures despite all precautions. For a medieval person, these scratching sounds, like snoring, are an ordinary part of life. If the man next to you is scratching furiously, it shows he is still there, fighting in his sleep. The sounds coming from outside vary depending on the inn's location. If it's within a town, you might hear the heavy footsteps of the night watchman and the thud of his staff hitting the ground. The watchman greets the town every hour, shouting, 2 o'clock, and all is well. This voice makes you feel that order is maintained within the darkness outside. If the inn is on the edge of a forest, the watchman's place is taken by the howling of wolves or the shrieks of owls. That thin wall between the wild sounds outside and the snoring inside is your boundary of civilization in this world. The dull sound of the wooden shutter on the window shaking in the wind keeps the tempo of the night. Occasionally, the crackle of a piece of wood thrown into the hearth reminds you that the warmth is still there. As you seek your own sleep rhythm among these sounds, you join that great medieval chorus with your own breathing. You are no longer a stranger. You are a part of tonight's symphony. The mind gradually stops trying to make sense of these complex sounds and transforms them all into a single wave of peace. Every sound whispers that you are not alone. In a medieval inn, you never truly sleep alone. A person, an animal, or the building itself is bound to accompany you. The noise brought by this collective living is a spiritual need for the medieval person. In that era, silence meant abandonment. These sounds, however, are proof of being alive. Now, let these sounds carry you into the second and deeper part of sleep. The mind is now focused only on the sound of the wind and the breaths. The air in the room feels as if it has turned into a solid substance in the early hours of the morning. When combined with the smoke breathed all night, the sweat, and the smell of stale beer, a biological pressure is established to draw one outside. When you get out of bed, the first thing you will do is check the gold pouch you protected throughout the night. When your hand touches that familiar bulge under your sash and you hear the sound of the silver coins rubbing against each other, you realize you have successfully made it through the night. In the Middle Ages, closing another day with your property intact provides a greater pleasure than breakfast itself. Now, take that heavy cloak over your shoulders and descend the creaking stairs to the main hall where life begins anew. A scene quite different from the chaotic sight of the evening greets you. The faint crackle of newly lit logs can be heard in the hearth. The innkeeper's wife is sweeping away the old straw from the floor and tossing it out. In the Middle Ages, breakfast was not the broad and varied spread we know today. In fact, for nobles and clergymen, eating early in the morning was considered a form of gluttony and a weakness of will. But for a traveler about to set out like yourself, or a laborer heading to the fields, breakfast is survival energy. The innkeeper hands you a piece of hard rye bread and the remaining dregs of the stew from the night before. Alongside it is small ale, beer with low alcohol content but high nutritional value. Do not let drinking beer at the crack of dawn seem strange to you. This is the coffee of that era, and it is the only fuel that will keep you on your feet for the first 10 kilometers of the road. In the Middle Ages, the word for breakfast literally means to break the fast. People were considered to be observing a kind of religious fast while sleeping through the night, and this morning meal symbolizes the body's return from that spiritual sleep to the physical world. However, this meal was usually rushed and eaten while standing. No one sat at the table for long conversations, for the sun has risen, and in the Middle Ages, the sun is the most ruthless boss, shouting that the working hours have begun. As you dip your bread into the ale and chew quickly, you see the innkeeper approaching you with a long, rectangular piece of wood in his hand. This is the most critical moment of the journey, the reckoning. In that period, the word reckoning did not just mean paying money. This process was usually carried out using notched sticks called tally sticks. In this world where literacy and mathematical knowledge were limited, the innkeeper would record the food you ate throughout the night, the mugs you drank, and the oats spent for your horse by carving notches onto this stick with his knife. When it is time to pay, the innkeeper places this stick before you. You count the notches, the innkeeper counts them, and once you agree, the payment is made. If you think a notch carved by the innkeeper is unfair, you may need to engage in serious haggling in that morning chill. With cynical realism, we might say the innkeeper's knife sometimes moves faster than his hand, adding an extra mug of beer to the bill. Payment is generally made with silver pennies. Gold coins are so valuable that trying to pay an bill with gold is like buying bread from a grocer and handing over $100 bill. The innkeeper likely does not have enough cash to provide change. While paying the bill, you are expected to leave a small amount of veil, or tip, for the groom. This tip ensures that your horse was truly fed throughout the night and its shoes were checked. When the coins change hands and the innkeeper drops your silver into his heavy leather pouch, the burden of being a guest is lifted. You are now a free traveler. As you pack your belongings, you notice how much the smoky air of the inn has seeped into your cloak. This scent will travel with you for a week. You lace your boots tightly, check the clasp of your cloak, and head toward the heavy door of the inn. As the innkeeper opens the door for you, he mutters a classic farewell like "May God keep your path open." This farewell is less a matter of politeness and more of a sincere prayer against the dangers of the roads outside. As you take your first step outside, the freezing and fresh morning air fills your lungs. After the dense human warmth inside, this sharp cold jolts you for a moment. While waiting for your horse in the courtyard, you hear the inn sign still creaking in the wind. The Green Man sign, which looked like a savior to you last night, is now just an old piece of wood. When your horse is let out of the stable, you see it breathing misty breaths in the morning chill, just like you. You check your saddle, balance your bags, and take one last look at the crooked walls of the inn. The only things you leave behind are a few silver pennies and perhaps a few scraps of leather forgotten under your pillow. In return, you received a roof that brought you to the morning and a stew that filled your stomach. At this hour of the morning, the town is slowly waking up. The smoke from the bakers has begun to rise, and the sounds of peasants' wagons heading to the marketplace can be heard from afar. You were a part of this small community for one night, and now you are. And you are leaving. In the Middle Ages, a journey consists of these types of short-term belongings. Every inn is a temporary homeland for you, and every bedmate is a temporary friend. The sun has now begun to rise on the horizon, and the shadows are shortening. This is the surest sign that it is time to set out. As you spring onto your horse and take the reins in your hand, you hear the inn door slowly closing. Now, before you lies that muddy and mysterious road stretching for kilometers. You have left the night behind. You have paid the price of security, and now you are moving toward a new day, a new story. Turning back to look one last time, you watch that thin smoke rising from the inn's roof vanish into the sky. A night spent in a medieval inn is not just an accommodation, it is a journey into the most vulnerable and honest moments of human nature. The hooves of your horse make rhythmic sounds on the soft, moist earth. The smoky air and noise of the inn are now far behind. Looking back, you see only a slender wisp of smoke rising from the roof. The morning chill touches your face lightly, but it does not bother you. The trees on both sides of the road pass by, silently greeting you. In the Middle Ages, roads were actually considered the veins of the kingdom. However, the maintenance of these roads was generally left to the mercy of the local people. Now, you proceed slowly on this rugged but peaceful path. The weight of the silver in your pocket has decreased, but your mind is filled with new memories. That slight you carry with you is the only true souvenir of the night. The innkeeper's mocking smile has now turned into a mere faint image in your mind. The steady breathing of your horse sings to you the most beautiful lullaby in the world. It is good to live in an age where the world turns this slowly. There is no need to rush, for time here is measured only by the sun. As the shadows lengthen, your fatigue gives way to a deep peace. The medieval inn was now just a stop for you. The people you met there are now writing other stories on their own paths. That heavy quilt and smoky room you shared have now moved far away. Your mind has emerged from that crowded table and reached the wide, empty meadows. Now, you hear only that thin whisper of the wind among the leaves. This sound slowly invites you into a deeper silence. The hooves of your horse have grown light, as if treading on clouds rather than the earth. Your eyelids grow heavy, slowly and naturally, like the dying embers of the hearth. Now, neither the fear of thieves remains, nor the innkeeper's unending reckoning. Only the infinity of the road and that safe harbor of sleep await you. Darkness is no longer uncanny, on the contrary, it is like a soft cloak wrapping around you. Under this cloak, the entire world has now fallen into a great silence. Your heartbeat has become completely attuned to the rhythm of the road itself. Now it is time to stop, and this long journey ends here. You have already stretched out on the softest straw of that inn and fallen asleep. Your dreams rise calmly toward the clear sky beyond that smoky hall. The old scents of civilization have given way to the scent of fresh, moist earth. The sounds have faded completely, and the world now seems entirely asleep to you. The lights have gone out completely, and only your steady breaths remain in the room. Sleep in peace, in the deep and secure darkness of that ancient world. Good night, and I wish you peaceful dreams.